It's the second day of the quarterfinals in the Skilling Open, and that means that 4 Grandmasters will be sent home. Hikaru is currently trailing MVL 1-0. Magnus Carlsen has a 1-0 lead over Anish Giri. Timur RADJABOV 1-0 over Wesley So. And LEVON has a 1-0 lead against Jan Nepomniachtchi. Before we get into the games, I just want to say thank you to all of you who have been staying up so late catching these recaps. We're getting 100,000 views in 24 hours, which is completely insane. And happy Thanksgiving to those of you celebrating. I took your advice, by the way. I'll be covering every match together. All the games, start to finish. We'll start with the Magnus and Anish Giri match. We'll end with Hikaru MVL. And in the middle, we'll have NEPO, LEVON, and Wesley and RADJABOV. So feel free to jump around. Let's go. Giri got us going very early with an Italian, something that we've seen before, but d4. Now, this is a very good move, this c3 d4 plan in the Italian, but normally seen at a lower level where people don't really know the theory, and you can overwhelm somebody in the center, like with e5, for example. There's also cd4, bishop b4, and this gambit where you can, for example, sacrifice this pawn and castle. I would highly recommend exploring this, even if you're like 1600. A lot of cool stuff here, but Giri goes for e5, and they bust out a bunch of theory, like usual, right up until this moment, when Magnus took on c3, which is actually not the most popular move. And then, after f6, Anish surprised Magnus with bishop c6. Normally, that's not what gets played, and this this caused a little bit of a pause from Magnus. Then he took on f6, Anish, bishop f3, and pawn takes g7. So Anish gets a 1-pawn advantage, and this kind of, well, at the moment, 2 pawns. But very quickly, Magnus picks this pawn back up. And it's a really strange position. He's up on time, and Magnus's king is like out in the open, and here Anish played the move king to e2. It's like looking very, very unpleasant to be Magnus Carlsen in this position. But Magnus plays super practically. Queen g6, for example, offering a queen trade, which perhaps Anish should have taken, and then played like a4, a5. That was really the big question in this game, of whether or not Anish was going to push his a-pawn. Another interesting plan here that Anish had was the plan h4, with the idea of h5 sacrificing the pawn to get control of the g-file, and at the same time to play rook h1, h5. But Anish played rook c1, which makes a lot of sense. King f7, which looks like it doesn't make any sense. Why would you run your king in the direction of the queen? That's actually the best space for it. The king on h8 would be vulnerable to a dark squared bishop attack. So Magnus puts his king here. And this is the moment where Anish could have actually like really pushed. He could have played for queen b4. This was one of the cool ideas, to try to play a4, a5. Essentially, the point here is that after something like queen b4, let's say black plays rook e8 to just pin you here, it's difficult to kick out Anish's pieces, and he has some annoying pressure on Magnus's position. Perhaps Magnus is still okay, but at least making Magnus push his a-pawn forward, in long term, it could be a weakness in the endgame. That would have been a good way for Anish forward. Anish didn't do that. He played bishop f4, and then he got hit with rook e7, and bishop takes d4. And even though, it looks like he's losing a piece, he's not, because of check. They trade all the pieces, and despite being pawned down, Magnus was very easily, actually, even for this moment, 2 pawns down. His activity is what makes this endgame basically impossible to win for Anish. Very nice practical idea, and it was on move 45, I think. They traded the pieces here, and got at move 44, Black's 44th move. Everything got traded, and the game ended in a draw. I mean, a nice practical game to start things off, but honestly, as far as this match goes, this was basically the biggest chance that Anish had all day. He was doing pretty well with the white pieces, but Magnus was too solid. And these two drew all their games. That's no fault of Anish's. They actually played very, very high-quality chess. Just both of them neutralized each other. And the problem is that Anish had to win today to make it to the Blitz and the Armageddon, and he was unable to do so. He just wasn't able to crack through Magnus. 4 draws, and that means that Magnus advances as the first semi-finalist. Now, there was a lot of action elsewhere. I promised that the next place that we would go would be the match between LEVON Aronian and Jan Nepomniachtchi. Now, Aronian has a 1-0 lead going into today, so he's looking to either make 2-2 in the Rapid or win the Rapid. He's not looking for Blitz and Armageddon. Let's see what NEPO is going to come up with. So, again, these two go for something that we've seen a lot. This Italian, castles, castles, d6, h3, and then Nepo plays d4. So he breaks, he plays the bishop back to f1. If you're looking at this as a beginner, retreating for completely no reason when you've developed basically no other pieces looks like it doesn't make any sense. And I actually kind of agree with you, but the point is that you want to sidestep d5. Your bishop is happy here for now, and maybe your knight will go to c4 in the future. But yes, I know, watching Super GM games as a beginner is like, I don't know what the hell's going on. Levy just talks in a very excited way, so I'll just watch. I don't even know what's going on. I'm just telling you. So queen c2, and it got really interesting right here. Levon broke, and we have the tension of the pawns in the center. We get take, and c4. Nice idea to hit the knight. The knight can go to b4 and hit the queen, but Levon goes to f4. But here's the problem. It's that one guy is far more developed than the other. Like, this guy has a long-range bishop. He's got his knights out. He's going to control the center. And right here, Levon played bishop f5 attacking the knight, but here there's a very nice move. Just rook d1. Completely disregarding the knight on e4 from being in any danger. And then rook a d1, and the queen's under attack. And Levon doesn't really have any choices here. He actually has to sacrifice the queen. The thing is, if he plays something like queen e7, which looks okay, knight d6. Serious slap in the face. It hits the rook, it hits the bishop. The queen is here. Taking this doesn't do anything because knight is protecting. So Levon has to sacrifice the queen. Again, if you guys watched yesterday's recap, you saw that Levon just likes not having a queen versus Nepo for some reason. And the worst part about this position is that it's a queen and two bishops, which during the live broadcast, I was like, it's like a queen with 7 espresso shots. The queen needs, the queen and the knight are a very dangerous combination, but queen and two bishop is like a jetpack for the queen. And what happens? Well, Nepo uses his pawns again, just like yesterday. He hides his queen, he trades once, and he pushes him back. He advances, he uses the pawns again. He brings in the queen. He uses the bishop. He uses another pawn to stop g5, and maybe get this. We get a5, b5, take, a4, he just takes, bishop a5, and I mean, he's just swirling around Levon. And finally, in this position, Levon resigns because of b8 queen. Very nice game. I mean, by Nepo, who takes a 1-0 lead. The next 2 games were drawn, and then we go to their 4th and final rapid game. Levon has to win this game to tie the match and ultimately win the overall thing because he won yesterday. Okay, Levon goes for c4. And then a break in the center, bishop g2, full control here by Nepo with the knights. Actually, very aesthetic position. And by the way, you guys might say, well, what is this? I don't know. I don't know why Levon didn't just put the knight on f3. I don't know. I don't know. I also don't know why he did this. Bishop takes c6. And then played f3. This is something... these guys played chess today, Levon and Jan, like 2 drunk guys, Like 2 drunk guys like playing Blitz and just trash-talking each other. It was the weirdest thing, I have to tell you. I've never seen something like this before. I can only assume that Levon really, really wanted to win this game so that he didn't get to the Blitz because I guess he assumes that Nepo's a better Blitz player. So let's see if he was able to do that. This is where Levon, where Jan started playing like a gangster. I mean, f5, right? h5, g5. An instant replay. f5, h5, g5. 3 moves in a row. Then he plays rook b5, defending his pawn. Then he plays g4. Levon strikes with e4. We continue with the knight coming forward. f4, knight comes forward, bishop e3, pawn comes forward, king g2, queen slides over 1 square to then come forward here, which is the benefit of moving all these pawns. Take, queen h5, pawn takes pawn, h3 check, pawn takes pawn, rook takes pawn, bishop to b7 activated here, rook bf5, think about that, rook b f5, because both rooks can go to f5, so the rook on the b file to go to f5, knight to g3, and after knight d2 check, king e1, queen back to e8 check, Levon resigned. Ladies and gentlemen, is this not the weirdest position that you have ever seen in your life? I tweeted this. I tweeted this in the middle of the broadcast. I was like, I'm pretty sure that this is the weirdest chess position I've ever seen. Ever. And it's resignable because if the king takes the knight, we take, check, and there's a rook hanging. I mean, how many moves went by of these two guys just hanging? Look at this. Like, what's going on here? Why is no one taking anybody else? And queen all the way back. I mean, it's just the weirdest. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Every piece, literally every piece, is interacting somehow. I don't know. I don't know. Well, my friends, we go to blitz. Okay. And in the first blitz game, Jan won with black. That's what happened. Jan won. So we go to the second blitz game where now LEVON has black and he has to win to force the Armageddon. Or else it's over. It's a 2-game blitz match. Let's see what happens. NEPO begins very principled with 2 pawns and 2 knights. LEVON is going for a very confrontational setup, which takes a little bit of moves to kind of get going. And then he plays an opening called the Hippo. The Hippo is confrontational because you rely on pawn breaks a little bit later. For the beginning, it looks a little bit non-confrontational. But the Hippo is a setup where you play b6 and bishop b7, which is actually exactly what LEVON does. This is called the Hippo. a6, b6, g6, h6, like this, and then the 2 knights in front of the 2 monarchs. If you want to give this a shot, play the Hippo, h3, knight f6, bishop d3, g5. So LEVON has to win. So why is he playing like this? Well, he's trying to create imbalance. He's trying to play something weird, something that Jan won't expect, and well, I'm sure don't think that he expected this, but he still plays e5, which is the best move. He breaks in the center. He's already castled. LEVON's king is in the center. Take, take, knight e4. Queen c7, queen c3. He knows LEVON will only trade queens in a way that creates some sort of imbalance. LEVON cannot play solidly. So queen a3, and now c4. Taking space, rook to c1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things control the c5 square, so that's the next move. d5, and here, knight sacrifice on g5. He realizes that all of this is very delicate. He gets to take on f5, and here, LEVON cannot take back because bishop g5 and rook comes down to e8. If you play f6, there is the very, very nice move, disregarding this, queen to e3. Creating the battery to get queen e8 checkmate. So bishop f5, bc5, and, well, probably the fanciest move of the entire game came right here. The same move that I actually just showed you, the move queen to e3. Completely ignoring that your bishop is hanging because it's untouchable. Queen e8, queen d8, and take would be mate. The other idea of queen e3 is that the f4 square has now been won, and you can bring the bishop back. And here, LEVON just went a little bit wild at the end here. Bishop f3, sacked his queen, rook g2, king f1, ef5, with the goal of bringing the rook and delivering a mate. Rook e8 check, the king is on the run, the knight is falling, 1 move away from mates. But bishop b6. And he resigns because king goes here, and then it's mate on a7. Jan Nepomniachtchi completes the comeback after losing yesterday. He wins 4 games out of 6 today against LEVON, winning 2 rapid and 2 blitz and 2 draws. And he moves on, and he will face Magnus Carlsen in the semi-final. Now we move to the matchup of Wesley So and Timur RADJABOV. And this one, this one was quite interesting because RADJABOV winning 2 games with black is not something that I expected yesterday. Again, it's another Italian. We've actually seen this opening like so many times. We already know there's going to be maneuvering. They're GMs. First central break, we have this. ed5 and queen d5. Now we have h3, rook d8. The bishop comes forward, but a little bit strange here. And all of this, honestly, frankly, is just a game of maneuvering. Queen comes out, queen comes back to move out of the way of certain pieces. I'm not going to sit here and analyze the Italian insanely deeply. That will take 30 minutes in and of itself. These recaps are already quite long. The first interesting moment of the game comes here, where a guy pushes a pawn to a square that white controls just 5 times, gives away the pawn, but here Wesley plays a beautiful move, c4, not taking back, because then we would have had bishop c4. He leaves the knight hanging in the center and realizes that the bishop is stuck, entombed by its own pieces, and he's gonna lose it. So some trades later, he finally gets to take, and then he plays the nice move d4. And you say, well, why would he play d4? He blocks his own bishop. But the light squared bishop in this position is more important than the dark squared bishop. Why? Because his opponent doesn't have a light squared bishop. This light squared bishop can come alive. You have 4 pawns on dark squares. It means that they shield the dark squares, and the light squared bishop will be able to maneuver. So watch what he does. He plays queen d3 and bishop b3, getting his queen into the game. He doesn't take the queen because he doesn't want to lose this, and he doesn't take because of this. So knight comes to c4, and Wesley plays e4, takes, and d5. Now the pawns are on a different color square because the dark squared bishop is able to come alive. So a nice kind of harmonious, not harmonic. What? Harmonious. So my chess is good. My vocabulary is not so great. So RADJABOV has to sacrifice the f6 pawn, and in doing so, he has to sacrifice the g5 pawn for the b4 pawn. So now he's down a pawn, but the biggest tragedy of this position is just the structure that RADJABOV has. It's his 3 completely isolated pawns. If they were together, it would be okay, but Wesley is able to take this position to the next level by going bishop a5. Here, it would have probably been better for RADJABOV to preserve a bishop at least, but it's really difficult to do that because you're going to lose c7. Wesley goes rook c6, takes, and slowly brings his king forward. Comes back, doesn't allow another check. Plays d7, rook d7, g4, king e5. And in this position is just 2 pawns up. And you would go, wait a second. Wait, whoa, what? Levy, hold on. How did that happen? How did it happen that after d7, he won the g-pawn? Well, let's go move by move. Rook g6, rook h7, rook g5, king f6. RADJABOV went to attack the rook and blundered that there is a check and Wesley can come back. If RADJABOV had played king to e6 in this position, there is no way to guard this. If you play here, this is a draw because 2 pawns on the h-file do not win against the king. If the king makes it to the corner first, 6 pawns don't win, or 7, but whatever. Stack the whole thing with pawns, even from the first rank. It doesn't win. It doesn't win. The king is in the corner. So RADJABOV blunders in a rook endgame, and Wesley wins, and wins that. This was his only win in Rapid. This was the only win. That's how even it was. So we needed to go to the Blitz. And then the Blitz was 2 draws. They drew both games in the Blitz. So we have to go to the Armageddon. It's time for the Armageddon. Wesley, the higher seed of the 2, gets to choose what color he plays in the Armageddon. He gets the black pieces. That means that he has 4 minutes. Timur has 5 minutes. But if black draws the game, black wins. So black gives away a minute, but has draw odds, no bonus time. Let's see what happens. Timur plays knight f3. Some fianchetto system. g3, double fianchetto. I like this system a lot, by the way. d3, knight d2. Kind of like a hippo-ish, except this knight should be here. And the reason why you would do something like this is you bleed black's clock. Black is down a minute, so you keep the pieces on the board. But Wesley got confrontational quickly. RADJABOV played h4, Wesley played b5. a3, rook c8. Queen e2, queen c7, and knight b6. Wesley's playing for something. He plays h6 and c4. He's now breaking on the queen side. He has to make something happen. bc4, knight goes to f4, knight comes to e5. Now the queen and the rook are opened up, the knight is pressuring this. Get knight f3, captures on d3, take, knight takes f3. But what about the rook? But what about this rook? Disaster. Timur RADJABOV blunders in a horrible fashion. In this position, if Timur had played bishop f3, he's worse. Black is incredibly active here, but the queen is still guarding the rook. RADJABOV just blunders queen f3 and Wesley plays queen c3, and that's it, down a rook. He could have sacrificed his bishop, but he decided to sacrifice his rook and try to go on some sort of attack on the king, but Wesley plays rook c5 to just take this when he gets the chance. Exactly what he does. Simplification. Very good rule. You're up material. Simplify. Get rid of your opponent's pieces. He takes the pawn on d3. And in this position, Wesley So did the sportsmanlike thing. And rather than playing this for a win, he just repeated moves. It's not a rated game. And oftentimes you will see at this level that under Armageddon rules, players who sometimes are completely winning with the black pieces will just repeat out of a sign of respect for the other player, because the other player wouldn't have maybe played some of the openings, wouldn't have played so aggressively. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think you should play for a win? Do you think draw is okay? But with this, Wesley So became the third semi-finalist in the Skilling Open, and the last match that we will cover is the match between Hikaru and MVL. I saved this for last because this match was insane. So, Hikaru down 1-0, opens the day with the white pieces, plays e4. He plays into MVL's Najdorf. Now in this position, this is one of the reasons I tell beginners and intermediate players not to play the Najdorf, because in this position, white can play bishop e3, bishop g5, white can play h3, white can play h4, white can play g3, white can play f3, white can play f4, white can play bishop e2, white can play bishop c4, white can play a3, white can play a4, white can play queen d3, white can play queen f3, white can play knight b3, white can play knight f3, white can play rook g1, and white can also play a move that I haven't even highlighted, bishop d3. This is like the 10th most popular move. Go check it out in the database. Tell me how many games you find of bishop d3 in this position. The Najdorf is insane. There are so many different branches of it, and Hikaru plays in a unique way, dropping his knight back, and then popping it out to g3, and here Maxime does something incredibly strange. He plays d5, and it looks like a normal move. But the problem is that his king is in the middle. It would have made a lot more sense, at least optically, to play bishop e7 and this, but instead of that, we get d5, and now bishop g5. You shouldn't be opening the center like this if your king is stuck there. Now bishop f6. He has to take with the pawn, because if he takes with the bishop, knight h5 is coming, and then queen f3 is coming. And look, just a fun example of how you can lose. Take, and the silent killer, queen d2. Nobody can stop this. You cannot get rid of the knight. If you play bishop to g4, I play queen h6 anyway, and I have too many threats. So he plays gf6, and now Hikaru, of course, still goes to the h5 square, just with the queen. We get queen c7, queen h6, and MVL sacrifices a pawn. Okay? He sacrifices a pawn to create some counterplay. He takes on a2 here, which is another move that I saw. I was like, why didn't Hikaru go b3? Looking like Fischer Spassky when the pawn on a2 got captured. But Hikaru plays knight f5, which is still a very strong move, takes on e7, and just puts his rook in the center of the board. Knight c6, now bishop takes pawn. It's kind of a funny looking move, but it's actually the best move. It's a free pawn. Now we get queen b4, now we get b3, so the pawn isn't captured, that's why the queen went out to b4. King to b8, Hikaru drops back, so he's no longer pinned. Rook d4, bishop comes back to e4, of course, defended by the knight. You got this. You know, guys might notice that the rooks are facing each other, but Hikaru doesn't want to take because he doesn't want to activate Maxime's rook, and Maxime doesn't want to take because he doesn't want to activate Hikaru's rook. It's a beautiful kind of tension here. Bishop e4, rook d8, rook c1, threatening pawn up to c3, queen c3. And what is the simplest way for white to play a win in this position? It's h4. It's h5. Who's gonna stop the pawn? So MVL plays rook d2 and Hikaru plays bishop d3. The rook falls into the trap. Bishop d3 defended by the pawn disconnects these two pieces, and knight e4 is coming. It's more or less unstoppable, and MVL resigns. The players then drew their second game, and the third rapid game was won by Hikaru. Also in a Najdorf, in basically the exact same variation, bishop to d3, slightly different, but a 2.5-half win in the rapid, which set up a date in the blitz. We go to the blitz. Hikaru's got the black pieces. This one, I'm gonna kind of fly through the opening because they played it 3 different times. Another Italian that we keep on seeing in this event, no Spanishes. It's like there was a rule to not play the Spanish or something. There was a few of them. So the players got all the way to this position. right here. Move 22. This was the rapid game that they played. Now they go for the blitz. And MVL has kind of a nice pawn mass here. Then they trade knight for bishop, and Hikaru's trying to defend. MVL comes up with a cool idea here to just play f5 and f6, and Hikaru lets him take on g7 because he's picking up the queenside pawns, which is exactly what happens. Pawn is here, rook took both pawns. Hikaru now wants a trade of the queens to just do this. But MVL brings the rooks forward. Then MVL plays a very important move. Queen f6. Sacrificing the rook with queen h6, queen h8. If you take, you end up in a really nasty box. Your king just can't move. So Hikaru goes rook c1 to try to go here. MVL plays rook f3. And now a beautiful combination from MVL. The whole point of this, rook h1 check from Hikaru. MVL sacrifices both rooks. And Hikaru plays f6, seemingly escaping, but not really, because check and the killer, check. The simple pawn check. If king takes, you take. If rook takes, you promote. And if in the game you go away, I sack my queen with check. I make a new queen. I check you again. I check you again. And I push. MVL had a chance in this game to have 3 queens, but Hikaru resigns in this position because the queen covers d1, and that's it. The game is over. MVL takes a 1-0 lead in the blitz. Hikaru now has the white pieces in the second blitz game. Let's see if he can not get eliminated. He goes with d4, which already was a surprise. He goes for a Trompowsky, and he just tried to create imbalance as fast as possible. He traded off a few pieces. He brought his knight back. The engine really was not pro Hikaru here. And this is where MVL started playing really correctly. He played knight d5, attacking the knight. Hikaru drops back, now f5, defending the center. Queen b1, bishop to g5, and queen b3. And it feels like white is just dead. a5, and MVL played knight b4. And during the live broadcast, we were like, okay. This is it. Because the problem is that the rook is trapped. The rook is trapped. Nothing that you can do. So, Hikaru, down a minute, down a game, plays rook c1, gives this away, and the knight came back. Then he plays f3. Take, queen b5, rook e1, rook e8, queen a2. So now you're threatening this, there's all sorts of diagonal tricks, king h8, and bishop goes to h5, hitting the rook, knight comes to h4. What is happening here? Is white making a comeback? Look at this, knight centralized. And the players repeated once, and MVL said, take my pawn. I have knight f6 hitting your bishop. Bishop back to e2, leaving the knight hanging, but counterattacking the queen. MVL trades the queens, but Hikaru plays bishop d3. MVL's knight got into e3, so Hikaru shuffled around here a little bit, defended his b2 pawn, and started kicking the knight out with his king, back to e7, and with his rook. Now knight d7, hitting the rook. Rook came up, and the queen side has now been glued shut. How is MVL going to possibly win this position? Well, he's not. After bishop b3, rook c6, MVL, in this position, blunders his pawns, and actually even worse, blunders his rook. A massive comeback from Hikaru. Massive comeback. MVL made basically one inaccuracy in that position, and that was actually just how passively he played after winning the exchange. And Hikaru played this f3, bishop h5, knight h4, down an exchange, down a game, comes back, and now we have Armageddon. Hikaru chooses to play with the black pieces, and well, it's more of the same, by the way. So like I said, we've seen this a lot, but this game was a little bit different because black has a minute down, so black has to play extremely fast. You guys will notice this is literally, we've seen all of this, but here the game got a little bit different, like a little bit different. Hikaru didn't take on f3 as fast as he did in the other game. He took the bishop first, and he kept his bishop on the board. So then we got b3, rook c8, king h2, and MVL tries to go for the exact same thing with some sort of kingside attack, and then trades the knights. Now, at this point of the game, MVL has about 2 minutes and like 20 seconds, and Hikaru has 1 minute and 20 seconds and no bonus time. So the players are going. They're shuffling their pieces. MVL is avoiding a trade of rooks. He then continues to avoid a trade of rooks and starts advancing on the king side. We get bishop c4, again avoiding a trade of rooks, but Hikaru gets the trade of rooks with rook a1. Rook b2, bishop d5, take, hide the king. Rook a2, Hikaru goes for the trade. At this point, maybe 50 seconds on the clock versus MVL's 150. So how is Hikaru not going to lose on time in this position? He's going to do it by bringing his bishop and pushing his pawn. This forces MVL to guard the pawn from going forward. Now we bring the king. G3, bishop d5. Knight b4, bishop b3, shuffling a little bit. f5, bishop d1, king f4, and the most clutch move of the game, g5. Now, the white king is stuck. You have to play en passant. If you don't know this rule, pawn moves 2 squares, stands next to your pawn, you take diagonally. Only for this turn, though. En passant, one less pawn off the board. If you know you have to draw this game, you got to get rid of those 3 pawns. King and knight versus king is a draw. So MVL plays g5, because otherwise Hikaru would have played g5. Take, but he still has 2 pawns. King f7, king f4, king e6, king e4, bishop b3. Hikaru at this point, 35 seconds on the clock and counting. Knight a6, king e7. They're shuffling. And then here, MVL went e6. Because he thought that after king e6, knight f4, and Hikaru took, which was the best move. MVL misevaluated that in this position, the activity of the king and the pawn being so far on the other side of the board, that's what's important. Be your A files, it will distract the white knight. The king cannot move away from the pawn, and the knight has to go watch over the other pawn. And that's it. That's all he needed. He needed the perfect distance between the two that the knight could not be useful, and the rest of the game was spent shuffling. MVL would have 100% played this for the clock. I mean, it's the semifinals. But on move 76, the game paused because the players did something called 3 position repetition. In chess, you don't need to repeat exactly 3 times. As long as you're shuffling and the same position occurs 3 times, the game ends in a draw. If we go back just a few moves, this is move 68. This is once that this position happened. This is the second time on move 70. And the players started shuffling around the knight, the king, and the same position on move 76. And it's a draw. Hikaru wins, coming back not just 1-0 overall down, but also down 1-0 in the blitz. An insane day of chess, and that sets up Magnus Carlsen versus Jan Nepomniachtchi, and Hikaru Nakamura versus Wesley So, the matchup, the Speed Chess Championship in the finals the past few years, and 2 fantastic American rivals who always play a lot of rapid and blitz against each other. What a day. What a day. With that, my friends, thank you once again for making it this far. My recaps have been going a lot longer than 20 minutes, which is what I hope for. Hope you're enjoying them. And yeah, semifinals begin tomorrow. I'm excited. I hope you are too.